Hi everyone, you're welcome to Kemafrik. My name is Kemafrik. In today's video, I'll be showing you how to make a very lovely panel dress. This dress has a yoke attachment, it has just a regular sleeve and peplums on the hemline. I call it a panel dress because it's basically divided into panels, okay? So if you like to see how to create this, please come along with me. Don't forget to subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. Drop a comment in the comment section if you find this video helpful, and share this content. This will help more people discover this channel and help us grow as well. Thank you for joining, and let's get right to work. Note that these images are digitally generated, hence you can't see the style line. However, it is not possible to attain this fit on a non-stretchy fabric without a dart. So you can either create panels or you just sew in both the bust dart and the waist dart to achieve this look. For mine, I decided to make it into a panel dress. I'll be starting off by drafting the basic bodice pattern, and if you haven't watched the tutorial on my channel, please do that so that you can fully understand what I'll be doing here. And I started by marking the shoulder line and the neck depth and width 3.5 inches by 3.5 inches, and right now I dropped the shoulder by 1.5 inches. This is just a new method I started using, and from there I marked the position of the chest line, and I'll be creating the armhole curve along this line. So right there is the chest line. Next I will proceed to mark the center of the line I created and create the armhole curve right there. So from this point onward, I'll be marking the bust point, the waistline, and the hip line. Please do wait to use your own measurement. I have a video on the channel where you can learn how to take body measurements. So here is the bust line, and the next line I have here is the waistline, and next I measured from the waistline downward to get the hip line. I think I positioned this at 8 or 8.5 inches, I can't remember. So that's the hip line, and then the full length of the dress right there. When measuring this length, you have to consider the fact that you'll be attaching a flare on the hemline. So just know that you have to subtract the length of the flare you'll be attaching from the total length of the dress you want. So right now I'm positioning my dart, and I'm doing that by marking the bust span divided by 2, which is basically the length from one nipple to the other. So that will help you position your dart. I went ahead to roll out the line which represents the dart line. So right here, I decided to make the neckline wider and deeper because of the style I was creating. So you can basically work with any shape of neckline that you want. Now I want to extend the dart line, and because of that, I'll be measuring that original shoulder width and marking the center of the line. So I'll just extend that line a little bit. Okay, I'm doing this because the darts won't get to the top of the pattern. It's an asymmetrical dress with a yoke attachment above it. So next I proceeded to mark the horizontal measurement, dividing the bust circumference by 4 and marking it on the chest line, and then I divided the waist circumference by 4, taking into consideration the width of the dart I'll be using, and then I'm also marked the hip circumference divided by 4, and along the hemline I decided to remove 1.5 inches from the measurement I took out for the hip, just to give it that tailored look along the nail. So I connected this point together, and that's what's giving us the shape we have right there. So the next thing I'm doing now is to mark the dart position. So I decided to make use of a 2 inches wide dart. I already added that measurement to the waistline. So I connected the dart to the apex, that's the lower apex, and the apex is just 2 inches above the hip line. So at this point I realized I didn't add the underbust line. So this is very important to give you that snatched waist look along the waist region. So on the underbust line as well, I marked the same 2 inches, 1 inch on both sides of the dart line, and then I'm connecting the mark to the bust point. Sorry, not the bust point, but 1 inch below the bust point, just so we don't have sharp points at the bust. Okay, so from this point, I decided to trace my pattern. I forgot to mention that this pattern is actually folded along the center front, and that's because I needed a full bodice to create what I'm making because it is asymmetrical. The yoke is asymmetrical. So because of that, I folded this pattern, and once I was satisfied with what I had to trace out all the lines I have here so it can reflect on the other side. And also I'll be taking out the side dart or the bust dart by marking 2 inches downward on the bust line. So this is the difference. The 2 inches I marked out is the difference between the front and the back half length. So that's what helps you know how much you should take out for the bust dart, so that after this is sewn in or transferred, you have the same length along the side for both the front and the back pattern. So at this point, I opened up my pattern, and because I could see the tracing I had on already, I could just easily mark out all the lines, and we have the same look on both sides of the paper. So this is what I have so far. Looks pretty, looks nice and lovely. So next we'll be marking the position of the yoke, and it just depends on what you want. Really just use your creativity. For mine, on the shoulder, I marked I think I marked 1 inch, and then I decided to position the other edge along the armhole curve. Once I thought I was satisfied with the point I marked, I decided to dot out with my marker to just so I can visualize what I will have at the end of the day before highlighting it using the marker and actually drawing the line for the yoke. Okay, so this was my initial draft. You will see how I decided to change the shape just a little bit before cutting out the rest of the pattern. So at this point, I was just trying to decide what I wanted. Once I'm through with this, I'll proceed to cut out the pattern. So guys, it's as simple as this. After cutting out the yoke, then I decided to extend that line a little bit, so I completely separate the lower part of the dress into, or the lower part of the pattern into panels. Yeah, this is what I was talking about earlier on. I taped back the yoke so I could reshape the edge of the yoke. So I basically raised it up a little bit because since I will be attaching a wording, I didn't want it to extend into the yoke, so I needed more height along there. So once I was satisfied with what I had, I proceeded to cut out the rest of the pattern. So because I wanted a continuous straight line along the side of the pattern, I needed to close up the bust dart so that I can just cut out a straight line along that part. So this is actually called truing, when you need to close up your dart just so you have even edge along that, along the side rather. So always remember that pattern drafting consists of a lot of decision making. At this point, I decided to raise the center front a little bit, I think 2 inches, and then I created a curve along the hem of this. Remember I said we'll be attaching flares on the hemline. Okay, so I wanted that raised look for the front and to also aid movement. You know, some of these clothes, when they are very tight along the nail line, can impede movement because this type of dress can't have slits on the back because the peplum will go all around. Okay, I just realized I've been saying a lot of because Here we have it, all the pieces we need for the front. I have the center front and the two side panels, which are different because it is asymmetrical, and then we have the yoke right there. Let's go ahead to work on the back pattern, and we'll be doing something similar to the back, but then the neckline will be just 1 inch deep and the width of the shoulder remains the same, but then the shoulder drop is just 1 inch. Okay, so from that point I marked out the same shoulder width from the shoulder drop downward. I marked out the point where we'll have our chest line. Please just watch the video on how to create a basic bodice pattern. I fully explained all of this in there. So the back is a bit simpler because all I have to do is to measure the back half length, okay, which is 2 inches smaller than the front half length, and from that point I marked the hip position. You have to note that the distance between the waist and the hem of the dress remains the same. That 2 inches difference is just from the top of the pattern to the half length. It's just the half length part. So I took out one of the front patterns and measured the length from the waistline downward, and I did exactly the same thing to the back. So right now I'm just marking out the line for the waistline, the hem line, and the hip line right there. At this point I came inward by half of an inch, unlike I think I used 0.75 for the front. I don't know if I mentioned that. And then I created the back armhole curve right there. Then for the dart as well, I'm using the bust span to position the back dart, and I just marked 4 inches. Remember that the back has a zip allowance, right? So when you're taking the measurement, it should not be inclusive of the zip allowance. So from this, I'm connecting all the dots together to create the back dart line, and I'll just raise it up a little bit to extend towards the chest line. And then I reshaped the back neckline and gave it a deep V neckline. I think I measured 8 inches downward. So now we can mark out the horizontal circumferences divided by 4. I have my bust circumference divided by 4, waist circumference divided by 4, the hip circumference divided by 4, and I removed 1.5 inches from that value for the hem. So for the waistline, remember to add the extra 1 inch you'll be taking out for the dart. So once that is taken care of, I'll be connecting these dots together to give it the shape of the side of the pattern. So just like I did for the front, for the back I'll be modifying the hemline. I marked 1 inch downward, so I just needed a little bit outward curve for the back. So the last thing I'll be doing to this pattern will be to tighten the center back along the waistline. So I took out half an inch from the waistline and blended it back to the zip allowance. So I'll also be reshaping this so that you can see that the zip allowance of 1 inch remains. It's just that we shifted it inward. So all this part I'm shaving still represents the zip allowance. So when you're sewing, you still have to sew that 1 inch zip allowance. So because we took out half an inch from this pattern, we need to eliminate any form of deficit. We can't afford to not have enough, so we have to replace the half an inch on the side of the waistline. So now I'm just cutting out this pattern. Since I'm done with it, we have all that we need to do on it taken care of. Now I want my dart to stop at the chest line, and so from this point I'll be connecting it to the center of the shoulder right there. So and then I'll need to create the dart by marking half an inch on both sides of the dart line along the waistline. I'll also be extending the dart line downward, and the length of the dart below will just be 4.5 inches, I think. So it's very important to label your patterns so they don't mix up. So I have the center back and the side back panel, and also on the front you need to do the same thing. Now I am cutting out the pattern into panels. If you happen to be hearing some background noise, please ignore, it's my kids. I actually had to lock them out so I can have some quiet in here. It's with utmost pleasure that I introduce you to our pattern set. We have the front pattern here, the side, the center, the other side, and the yoke. And then we have the center back and side back panels for the back. And then I have the sleeve pattern here. Please check out my tutorial on how to make a sleeve pattern. Next thing on my to-do list will be to create the flare. I have a very detailed tutorial on how to make different degrees of flares here. You should check it out, like you need to check it out. Okay, so right now I measured around the hemline of the patterns I have, and I calculated the radius by dividing it by 6.28 because I'm making a 360-degree flare. After getting the radius, I'm marking out the radius there. It was 5.75. I'm marking out the inner radius from the tip. I folded this pattern into 4 as you would do for a full circle flare, a 360-degree flare. So right there, I'm cutting out the inner circle, and before I cut it out, I actually added half an inch seam allowance. So the flare I'm making will have 3 layers. I'm starting with the smallest one because it makes it easier for me to cut the other ones, because I can easily use it as a pattern for the other ones. So the one I'm marking here is just 5 inches long. From the first curve I created, I'm marking 5 inches. So that way I can then mark out the outer circle of this particular flare. So note that I'm just using my chalk here. I prefer doing this directly on the fabric because it's just complex. Going through paper again is too direct for that sort of thing. If you don't know how to do this yet, you need to watch that tutorial on how to create circular flares, different degrees of circular flare with different degrees of fullness. You will totally enjoy that tutorial. So from this point, I'll be laying this on another fold of fabric. I'm using a blue fabric here, and I'll just simply add 2 inches to the hemline because we just want to create a layered effect. Because the allowances are already included, there's no need to add any other extra things, just an increase in the length of 2 inches. I'll do the same thing for the third layer of flare. So once I'm done with the 3 layers of flare, we are ready to sew. Once again, these are the patterns I'll be cutting out on fabric. Join me in the next tutorial where I'll be putting you through the sewing process. We'll be using a complete inseam finishing, so don't miss that tutorial. I'll be attaching it to the card after this video once it is up. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.